Hello and welcome. We're glad you're able to join us. With us today is Dr. Jeff Stritzel, Assistant Vice President of Provost Initiative with Baylor University. Jeff's presentation title is They Got Fired and Told Me About It, 3 Lessons Learned from 46 Derailed Leader Experiences. Like you, I am very excited to hear more about Jeff's study and the lessons learned. But before we get started, I would like to just remind everyone that this webinar is recorded and it will be available on our ACRO website. So please feel free to share with your colleagues. If you haven't already, you can go ahead and turn on your closed captions. And please post your questions for Jeff in the Q&A feature. You can ask your questions at any time, and you can ask anonymously. We will be answering, or Jeff will be answering the questions at the end. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be with you today to be able to present aspects of some empirical research that I conducted. Just a quick kind of overview of what I hope to do, just give a little bit of focus on what is this research project. And then, of course, the findings I'll be drawing from quotes and comments from the participants in the study that I conducted. And the second portion is really focused on those lessons learned. Hard lessons, hopefully providing us the opportunity to be able to learn them without maybe having to go through our own job and career derailment. So in a way, this webinar is a fulfillment of the hope of the participants in my study, as I spoke to 37 leaders, but you'll note in my title, there are 46 derailment experiences. Some of the folks derailed 2, and in a couple of cases, 3 times. So certainly a high degree of wisdom learned that we're going to be able to draw on today. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I will go ahead and dive in. First, probably importantly, just clarifying, I'm going to be using the term derailment throughout, and you rightly might have pictures of trains being derailed, but I'm talking about an involuntary or unwanted departure by a leader from an organizational position. This came through interesting kind of conversations with the participants. There were situations where they said, I was actually relieved to lose this job, or I didn't see it coming at all, or there's a certain level of difficulty in trying to capture what it means to lose a job in terms of individual experiences. But this is the term that I wanted to draw from, and also there is a research base for this study. You are probably familiar with folks who have lost a job. You yourself may have parted ways with an organization. It's so common. I think of the Chronicle of Higher Education posts this, it's almost a genre, just a kind of a circulation of folks who come and go. And so while derailments and job loss is relatively common, we don't talk too much about it, which is in some ways surprising because it is so, not just so common, but so costly. Derailments cost, obviously, the money, the income of those who are being derailed, but in terms of organizational stability, in terms of any payouts that are offered to these folks, when there's a lot of turnover, particularly in executive roles, the employee morale might be lower, the institutional reputation might be tarnished. There are just so many costs when we have leaders in higher education part ways. And so while it's costly in terms of that kind of weakened perception, we still see it happen on a regular basis. Little research has been done on this. I was actually surprised to find that out. Of the research that has been conducted, a lot of that research focuses on presidents, and I think that makes a lot of sense. In the study that I conducted, however, I was interested in a more diverse pool of folks because presidencies, while presidents have a wide array of responsibilities, their experience within the organization is of a particular type, whereas provosts, vice presidents, vice provosts just have a different dynamic in the roles that they serve. So I wanted to get a little more diversity in that space. As far as the research is concerned, there are three main areas, because of course we're all kind of asking the question, what causes folks to lose their jobs? And some of this is maybe not surprising. One would be personal shortcomings, some of that in terms of competency, their ability to fulfill tasks. Certainly, if there's a moral failing or an ethical failing, that's pretty obvious. A second major factor in the research is that there are institutional dynamics, the context and the place. You could lead to a job loss as a matter of contraction or layoffs or those sorts of realities. And then the third, and I think certainly we see this quite a bit in my study, is that there's superiors' decisions. Now, again, because a lot of the research is around presidents, the terminology had been mostly around board shortcomings or board decisions. So that group of people is essentially the president's boss. But when we're thinking about provosts and vice provosts, deans, vice presidents, those folks have a direct report to the president oftentimes. And so that individual has a significant influence over the quality of a person's experience or their ability to stay at the institution at all. So asking this question really drove the entire study. How do senior level higher education administrators experience and navigate derailment? And that provided a wide range of answers. We're going to draw specifically on one of the questions, kind of sub questions to that main research question. But just so you know, this is an area that's not well understood. And so I just want to understand broadly, what is it like to be derailed, and how do you navigate that type of a situation? In terms of methods, I just want to say that this was a constructivist study. Constructivism is really studying people's unique and manifold perceptions, their viable interpretations about the nature of reality. And so obviously people make sense of their experiences in different ways. And there are factors that are included in their sense making, cultural, social, organizational dynamics. Some of that is biases, but certainly when you're asking about a person's experience, you really do want their perspective as opposed to any other way of getting at answers to the research question. Received institutional review board approval and then went on to, as I mentioned, 37 senior level higher education administrators who experienced a total of 46 career derailments. And I also made a point of seeing if I could find folks who had been, if you will, re-railed. They'd found another leadership role within higher education. I was able to get on the phone with these folks, and while I think there could have been benefit to meeting one-on-one with these individuals, there was an added benefit to having a kind of what one colleague has called a confession booth effect. Being on the phone, maybe limiting some of the differerences between myself and those that I was interviewing was really a neat opportunity. And several of the participants said they shared with me more information about their experience than they had any other person. I thought that was telling. But they were really good. They lasted approximately 100 minutes on average per person. So some really rich data. In terms of who participated, of course, throughout, I want to use names as pseudonyms, and I want to even put images in front of us, albeit blurry and non-identifying, to remind all of us, including me, that these aren't just stories. These are individuals' lives, experiences that really happened, that were really difficult oftentimes. But in terms of the profile, we've got 6 presidents, 5 provosts, 24 VPs or deans. There's pretty good parity, 18 women and 19 men study, and it was a majority of white identifying group. We have 5 folks who are either Black or Latinx. So having kind of moved through where the nature of this research study, I also want to include that I purposefully did not search for folks who had done some of these blatant ethical failures or even moral failures. No one identified having done that, where it would have been kind of a, well, you did something illegal and thus you're going to lose your job. It was a little more nuanced than that. Clearly, with any qualitative study, as with this one, there's some potential for self-selection. I only interviewed the folks who were willing to be interviewed. So my findings are maybe skewed in that way, but I think broadly generalizable for us for general information as well as for those in similar situations. And of course, I'm using specific terminologies like derailment throughout the whole process. There are so many different ways to look at this. I was recently talking with a colleague who said when they experienced a transition, they went through grief. And I think grief and grief theory uh, could be a whole other wonderful way to look at this. But nonetheless, I want to focus in on the results of a question that I asked. It was in my protocol. Based on your derailment experience, what advice would you give to those who aspire to leadership in higher education and administration? And I think participants, not only did they provide some diverse and insightful and even sometimes contradictory encouragements or exhortations, they were rooted in their individual experiences. They really wanted to give this advice to folks as well. They wanted to feel like not only did they experience something difficult that they were able to learn from, but their hope would be that all of us here today, could benefit from the wisdom that they gained the hard way. And hopefully it can help them have a better experience, develop more as leaders, and clearly there's a hope that they could, at least in part, avoid job loss and derailment. So the first piece of advice is to know yourself. Now, this is not new. It's been around for centuries, but we want to look at what they meant by knowing yourself. The second is aligning yourself. And we'll unpack that, and then developing yourself. So in some ways, these are old wisdom, simple wisdom that we've maybe heard in other contexts, but I hope that we can see a little bit of the nuance and the ways that these folks learned these lessons from their vantage point and their perspective. So first, I want to talk about know yourself. Part of what participants meant by knowing oneself is to discern motivations. And so, as you see on the screen, Joe, chief academic officer, said that my advice to leaders or aspiring leaders is about creating that space to learn and know about yourself. Specifically, participants had opinions about what motivations were sufficient or insufficient during and certainly in order to achieve their leadership roles. I think of Fred, who is serving as a president. He added that prestige or money or feeling accomplished were insufficient motivations to lead in higher education. Another participant, Brad, who had also served and been derailed as a president, said that aspiring leaders shouldn't seek executive roles for, quote, fame and position and money. So I find that this is really a good encouragement for all of us at any point in our career. What is it that is driving us? Why are we motivated to be in our current role? Why are we motivated to aspire to leadership? Especially when we consider from this derailment perspective that those in the executive levels of leadership might be at greater risk of losing their roles. There's another participant, Chief Student Affairs Officer Jim, said that these are the most incredible jobs in the world because you're doing a job that nobody else wants to do and can do and will do. Think about if you're doing it because it's easy or fun, well, in his words, you're high as a kite. Clearly, it's not always easy and not always fun. Jim went on to say, but if you think it's going to have a major impact on the future of young people in your state, your nation, your country, well, then you're on the right path. Or I would add, you're in the right fields, higher education. That's an aspect of knowing oneself in terms of motivations, but closely related, participants talked about discovering purpose or clarifying one's purpose. Meg, a president, encouraged aspiring leaders to cultivate greater awareness and clarity about how pursuing leadership in higher education fulfilled a sense of purpose. Probably most important, she said, is to know who you are and why you're really doing what you're doing and what you want to accomplish. Rather than identifying a shallow motivation, Meg framed this as a process of self-discovery and larger purpose. She said that administrators should be, quote, centered in oneself and know that what you're there for. What are you there for, really? Similarly, Jan, who's the chief student affairs officer, said, quote, you have to be passionate about a bigger cause. You have to believe in yourself, but it can't be about you. The third aspect of knowing yourself, the third kind of sub theme that I heard, was captured well by Sarah, a dean, who pointed out that higher education administration can be unpredictable. And unpredictability isn't bad necessarily, but your expectation about the level of predictability really could be. So she said it's a really freaking volatile world out there in higher ed admin. So love it and be aware that it can change on a dime and interrogate your comfort with that. More directly, provost that I spoke to, Judy, added, quote, people get fired all the time and sometimes for cause, sometimes for not. Really implying that even those who are the best in their field still might find themselves in an unfortunate situation, still might be let go. So yes, competency is good, skill is good, a great network is good, being awesome at your job essentially helps you, increases your chances of a long, wonderful career. But there are other factors at play, and these folks just say, be aware, know that that's a reality about your environment, and then be sure to be reflective about how that might sit with you and how you might respond in those situations. A little bit of early work. So again, this is the know your motivation sub-theme, know yourself sub-themes rather. Discern motivation, discover purpose, challenge expectations. Next, I want to talk about align yourself. This was really a theme that came through strongly, and there were other, as before, sub themes. So, thinking about aligning yourself, they really were talking at times about aligning yourself with your values. So, Brad, a president, said, make sure that you've got a clear idea of your passion, and then make your career choices on the basis of what will enhance your ability to continue to have your passion right there in front of you in the work that you do. I understood Brad's reference here to passion as less reflective of one's overarching purpose, maybe more reflective of someone who really enjoys the work that they're doing, and that is kind of supported and guided by an overarching purpose. Another aspect of this, aligning yourself, would be aligning yourself with your institution. Now, this is, to be clear, not always easy. We can't always find the right place. So we might find that leaders come in, superiors, supervisors, who change the dynamic of the environment. But nonetheless, there is some advice here around paying attention to the institutional dynamics. Brenda, Chief Information Officer, asserted that culture matters, and it was clear that it's a personal thing. There's not a one size fits all culture, but the goal would be that wherever you work, you can find that you resonate with the themes and motives and goals there, and likewise, that it's the kind of place that you are excited to support in your work. Related, I talked to Laura, who said, stay true to who you are, because you can't just give your all to a job and try to fake it the entire time. So once again, the culture of an institution, aligning yourself with the institutional mission, culture, even departmental culture, or certainly your supervisor, is really important. That's not to say if you're not happy, quit on the spot. But as you think about where you are or where you want to be, these leaders found that at the end of the day, you do ultimately make a choice about where you work. You don't have to work somewhere. You do need an income, but you don't have to be unhappy every day that you go to work. And so you can really look toward giving your best and finding a place that suits you in terms of culture. And thirdly, aligning yourself with your boss and coworkers. This is kind of a derivative of this culture, and I mentioned it earlier, but throughout the study, participants demonstrated that their supervisors and their coworkers play significant roles in the type and quality of their experience. Some participants highlighted how important it was to align themselves specifically with their boss and their values. And I think Lisa captured this well. She said, work for people and work around people have the same ethical and moral values that you do. So that's another layer as you think about what are people willing to do to succeed in their role compared to what you're willing to do, what you would view as okay. Naomi, a senior academic officer, said that we ought to think carefully about fit. You have to work with people who you can who you can work with. She felt that aspiring leaders need to be looking for a place where they feel like they could fit and would mesh really well. So as we think about aligning ourselves, we align ourselves in terms of our values, in terms of the institution that we choose to serve at, and then be aware of, and to the best of our ability, align ourselves with our boss and our coworkers. Now, clearly, we all have a boss, but I want to say an extra word about the coworkers here, because as one reaches the executive levels of leadership, the politics of an organization become more and more important, more and more significant. And so in some cases, coworkers had a significant influence on the leader, really the study participants' experience. Were they helped and supported, or was there a competition there? Was it a poor relationship that really created a detriment between oneself and the institution, oneself and their supervisor if they report to the same person? Just some political aspects that are worth just giving a nod to. So know yourself, align yourself, develop yourself. Clearly, competencies, when we think about what are the skills and abilities that we have, this came out in this conversation. Some people get promoted too quickly. Gina's comment here as a chief enrollment officer was just highlighting that when folks are aggressive about making progress in the types of titles or job responsibilities that they have, she's onto something here that's supported by research, which shows that if a person is only in a role for 2 years, and then they're promoted at a different institution, and they're in that role for 2 years, and then they're promoted at a different institution, the narrative can sound very strong that this person is a go-getter, that they're a young talent, and so on. And those things are true. It's also true that a person can really miss some of that foundational knowledge and skills that are necessary for success at the highest levels of leadership. Meg put it straightforwardly: get training, learn about money, or she's really talking about budgets, how to manage and steward the funds and resources that are given to you, especially at those highest levels of leadership. Many participants gave advice for those practical skills. You see, Laura said that become fluent in organizational cultures. So we begin to make other connections between not just understanding and aligning oneself with the culture within your department, maybe institution, but also understanding how institutions of higher learning work, how diverse they are, how different enrollment management is from other aspects of academic affairs or student affairs or athletics or fill in the blank. When you're at those senior levels of leadership, Laura really said you have to understand the dynamics that are at play. And so I thought that was helpful. I also want to add, even though there's no quote, Brenda suggested that the colleges, universities are a mix of different cultures. So just as Laura said, there's organizational cultures that are not just influencing one's ability to do work, but also influencing the dynamic of the relationships that you want to build. So be a learner, reach out to them and try to understand their vantage point. What is it that they are prioritizing and valuing? Moving on, we clearly want to develop ourselves in terms of competencies, but as I noted before, developing oneself politically is important and was noted by participants in this study. So, or maybe another way to say this is that it's not just a matter of being good at your job. So Patty, a senior communications officer, said she learned the importance of demonstrating her value to her supervisor and other senior administrators within the institution. She needed to be an advocate for herself. She said, quote, if you don't show your value, then at any given point, you can be let go without cause. Patty started aspiring senior leaders to become invaluable to the team and to the university as well. Participants seemed well attuned to the importance of their own reputation. Accordingly, as many of us would understand, they advised us to be careful how we manage other people's perceptions of us. So Rachel said that it's very important that you think about how your loyalties rather, are perceived. How is it that not just your skills, but also your political loyalties and relationships across campus? How is it that other people see you? Thirdly, develop yourself professionally. Now, this is related clearly to competencies, but we're really talking about developing oneself professionally for success. And Charles here says, if it so happens that you lose your job, you want to make sure you have a list of accomplishments that you can share. People who will speak positively of you as you enter your next job search. So not merely did Charles say, do a really good job, not, not merely did he say have a strong work ethic. Those things are good and hopefully underlying assumptions. But he admitted that there are utilitarian motivations for being an effective administrator. I would say and they would add, I think as well, involvement in professional organizations such as ACRO and others. Having that network proved to be really useful for those. Not only are you able to kind of sharpen yourself with the intellect and experience of colleagues within the field, but if something like a job loss happens all of a sudden, then you have a network of folks who can help support you. It's really a case for being more involved in ACRO maybe. But I will share too that there were a couple participants who were surprised by a job loss and had a new job offer within a matter of hours. And it was because they followed this, because they were able to build a reputation, not just within their institution, but within their field, within the profession. And so they were able to, as they notified folks functionally, hey, my email's not going to work anymore. They were also able to advertise, I'm on the market and I would be happy to be helpful if needed. I think of one person who within 3 hours had 2 job offers because of that strong network that he had. He was so clearly able to provide value wherever it was that he could go, that folks offered him jobs within a matter of minutes. So let's do a quick review. These are these admonitions from folks who have been in senior leadership, lost at least one role, and have found roles again. They've said to know yourself, be self-aware, discern your motivations, your purpose, challenge your expectations, align yourself with your values. Again, knowing yourself allows you to clarify what your values are, and then you're able to match your words or your thoughts with your actions. How is it that I want to behave? Where is it that I want to serve? Does the institution that I'm currently working at really align with who I am as a person, or the priorities that I have, the culture that I want to be part of and contribute to and even lead? And then, of course, mutual relationships, the coworkers that you work with, and I would add outside of your institutions, that we have these colleagues that have a significant influence on who we are now, how we experience our life day to day in our work, as well as who we'll become. And then that leads into developing yourself, of course, developing yourself in terms of competencies, developing yourself in terms of your reputation and intra-institutionally, and then developing yourself professionally, that you're engaged in growing with reputation and skills outside of just your institution. So what are the practical steps that we can take? I think we've touched on quite a few of these, but in review, know yourself, align yourself, and develop yourself. I want to provide just a few more examples, and I'm sure that even in the Q&A time, you all could make other recommendations, but here are some to think about. Practical ways to know yourself would be to participate or to engage in personality assessments, any leadership development surveys, or a number of different assessments that are out there that are really, really good. I would encourage all of us to get mentoring or coaching in some way. And there are certainly ways to pay for this service, experts in this area. But I would also add your network, your colleagues, the folks that you meet at conferences. When you attend a session, you're impressed by the speaker, go up and make an introduction, share business cards, and get on a phone call once or twice a year with that that individual or that group. Create maybe an advisory board, folks that you would say, you would ask, would you be willing to get on a call with me once a year or twice a year? And you do that with 6 or a dozen people. And now you're talking to someone who's willing to give you some feedback every month or even more often. A couple other ideas would be mind mapping and vision boarding. This is basically going through exercises that allow you to dedicate time and space to envision what the future would look like, and then to be able to reverse engineer how would you practically get where you want to go. Doing that will be able to allow space for you to be honest with yourself about your motivations and also attach yourself to a sense of purpose. But clearly, then you'll be able to do the practical steps of, okay, how do I get where I want to go? In terms of aligning oneself, these are other exercises or steps that you can take. Personal mission statement, I found that to be rewarding. Uh, Clearly, your faith or worldview and integration, thinking about how is it that I believe, what do I believe about the universe? What do I believe about what it means to be human? How does that integrate into my professional life and day-to-day life? As well as articulating your professional philosophy. You know, in the academic realm, there is an uh, expectation that if you're going to apply for a teaching job, that you have a philosophy of teaching, that you have a philosophy about diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging, that you have a statement. So in the administrative spaces, we're not always encouraged to do that in the same way, but I think it's a really useful idea. So we encourage you to do that. And then going through and just writing out or having a conversation with a colleague or mentor around what are your career aspirations and why. Do you have a preference around institutional type? And certainly that will be influenced by your past experience, but maybe there's an idea or a vision that you have for the future that looks different in terms of not just institutional preferences, but also culture preferences. What's the kind of dynamic that you want to experience when you're in the office in your daily work? And then thirdly, some practical steps around developing yourself. Some of this overlaps clearly with other sections, but I would say if you don't kind of pay yourself first, begin a practice of some sort, whether that's carving out 20 minutes in the morning to do some reading, whether that's research, whether that's one of the accurate journals, whatever it may be, find ways to pour into yourself through gaining more knowledge, particularly around cutting edge research, because that is part of what you can bring is an awareness of what is leading in the space currently. Acro resources, clearly want to point that out. I mentioned the advisory council or your own personal board. I know there are different ways to organize this, and some of us may or may not have done this already. There are different ways to do it, certainly, but I would say that my encouragement, and for some of the folks that I spoke to in the study, they reached out and cold called those folks that they really aspired to be like. They didn't allow a lack of connection to stop them. They went and they were proactive. They created that connection. I would also say that seeking stretch goals or tasks is really, really important, not just in the skills and knowledge that you'll gain, but in terms of what it signals to those around you. That you're someone who wants to continue to expand in knowledge and capacity, which means that you'll be able to increase in value. I would also say, not certainly there's competencies and things, but when you focus on conversations, focus this bullet here around subtext and nonverbals. This is really a nod to knowing that some of the things that are said are not all of what's being communicated. What is it that's not said that is important to be aware of or cognizant of? What is it around the language that's used where there's more meaning there that's layered than what's kind of upfront or most obvious? And then I would also encourage you all, I know this might seem strange and maybe a little self-serving as someone who came from a student affairs background, but consider student affairs professional competencies in tangent with those in your field as enrollment management or registrars, thinking about what are those skills that I can grow and develop, that I can kind of expand the work that I do and be of greater value to an institution. Uh, there's so much in terms of events and training. So I just want to do a quick plug for ACRO. Been impressed with the quality of their resources, but also the fact that often this is at low or no cost. So take full advantage of those opportunities as well. And with that, I'm wrap up and be happy to answer and entertain any questions. Velma, if you can help me with that, that'd be great. But I'm going to try to find my Q&A box.
Absolutely. Please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A feature. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand and I can unmute you as well. Jeff, we do have 2 questions in the Q&A. If or I'm not sure if you're able to see.
I'm just a little slow, but I'm
No
bringing
worries.
those up. I'm bringing those up now.
Take your time. Absolutely.
All right. What was the average time frame for when the derailment happened versus their start in the role? This is a great question. I was speaking to folks who were currently in executive roles, and so there was a diversity there. Some folks, I would say a minority, were derailed a little bit earlier in their career, associate, a director, maybe a senior director role, and they saw that as maybe an advantage, a sense that they could work through that. And then maybe by the time they were in roles of executive leadership, it was a distant memory. But most of the folks were in upper middle to executive level leadership when they lost their roles. And I think there was kind of a shared understanding that it's one of the dynamics of being on the president's cabinet, for example. This concept of cleaning house that many of us are familiar with. That was something that they also were familiar with and influenced how they perceived the nature of their role and the nature of being let go, because they knew that's one of the call it the cost benefit analysis. It's great to have a 6-figure salary, but this would be the way that they would kind of see the risk of that as well. That even though they could be earning a higher salary, they also run a greater risk of losing that role with just simply the change of a president or certainly a direct supervisor of any kind. Please share if there were red or yellow flags leading up to the derailment. The short answer is yes. But the more nuanced answer is that it's much easier to identify those flags in retrospect. So in executive leadership, one of the most important roles is not merely management, of course, you need to manage folks well, but it's really leadership, which is influencing a group of people for a shared goal. But in higher education, we have many goals, competing goals. So I think of several folks in the study who were change agents. And one of the challenging aspects of being a change agent is that you see yellow flags all the time. You're actually trying to nudge and move people along. One of my favorite descriptions of leadership by Heifetz, a Harvard professor, he says that leadership is really about disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. And so leaders in executive roles are trying in some ways to raise these yellow flags around disappointing people. You're trying to get them to change and move and work with you. But to your question about red or yellow flags, they're the maybe easier flags to identify in terms of job loss are when you notice what your direct supervisor does or does not do, does or does not say. So I had one participant who lost their job, and it was the first meeting they had had with them. This person clearly did not value their input and didn't schedule a one-on-one meeting with them at any point in their term. And so it was about a year that went by, and then they received an invitation to a late Friday afternoon meeting. And, it wasn't a surprise in the sense that there was never a great connection made with that leader. I think being aware of the relationship there has got to be the kind of the top priority. That you do what you need to stay connected to the person who has the most influence over your ability to stay at that institution in that current role. The other would be any kind of finance dynamics. So a number of folks talked about how they were performing well in their role, but the institution was struggling financially. That's just a reality, and I think that alleviates some of the maybe blame for an individual and their specific behavior. Sometimes you can do everything right, and there just needs to be a contraction or right sizing of the institution. And as uncomfortable or unwelcome as that is, that's another kind of element of the environment where you can pay attention and see, what, I need to be aware that this is just what it means to work at this institution right now, and there's the potential, hopefully unlikely, but certainly possible, the potential that that might mean I need to keep my eyes open for the next opportunity. Let's see, any tips on what we can do when an extremely valuable colleague is unfairly fired because of institutional politics? Well, if it's already happened that the person was unfairly fired, this is a real challenge. Part of what we can do for any one of our colleagues who's experiencing this is advocate for them in terms of their next role. Be thought partners with them about what that could look like. In terms of the unfairness of the firing, to me, sometimes that's an endorsement. I talked to one participant who worked in enrollment management, I believe, who was so good at what they did that realistically they were a threat to a weak leader. A new president came in, and this vice president was so good at what they did that they outshone the president. Clearly unfair, I would say unethical, small of this leader to do something like that, to send someone away because they're so good at what they do. But people are a lot like people sometimes, self-interested. And so there's not a whole lot that can be done once it's already happened, except to be able to support them, give them new ideas around what they could do next, and really reinforce their value. They're so valuable. Don't be afraid to just say that, not in a flattering way, but just in a genuine and authentic way, an encouraging way to say objectively that the person who is fired might feel that way, that it was unfair and that they are bringing a lot of value. Hearing that from others is a huge encouragement to them to be able to triangulate, because particularly those who lose a role after being successful at every step of their career, there's a cognitive dissonance that happens. There's sometimes, not always, a deep questioning around, am I valuable? Am I good at what and so that the encouragement there is always appreciated. I will add too, if you're in a position to be able to hire someone temporarily, so some of these folks who lose roles, especially if it's been recent, they might be open to an interim opportunity. A number of folks in the study did take advantage of interim roles because then they were able to have kind of a stopgap where they could put their skills, knowledge, experience, and value to work in short order while also looking for something more permanent. So if you are a president or have the ear of a president or provost, that's another opportunity, something that you could do to advocate for these folks. I don't see any other questions. Are there some down? There we go. Susan, thank you. Is there any specific change management research that helps this process and reframing? It's a great question. Change management research is adjacent to what I've done. I know that the traditional Peter Drucker change management has its uses. So thinking about how urgency and having that urgency isn't important to have. Again, I would put that in relationship to the reality that while you want people to have a sense of urgency and you want them to, in a sense, be moved along through a process of disappointment, it does take a certain cadence and pace that you need to be careful of. I do have a text that's at hand that's been really useful as I think about change management. And uh, it would, I would think, take more of a sustainable approach. Change management that's highly relying on one single leader is useful, but I think that thinking about change management as a unit, in the academic side of higher education, there's this peer review process that I think is, while maybe slow and cumbersome at times, also really useful as a mechanism for drawing out the wisdom of a group. My philosophy, and I think others share this idea, that the genius or the best idea in moving forward is a combination of the wisdom of all those who are in that group. So that's where I would say if you can make it a participative process, that's really important. In terms of the theory around change, I think it's relatively simple. So recognizing a need for change, unfreezing or really kind of loosening your grasp on what it is that needs to be adapted, and then into implementing that change. And what's great about change management on the organizational level is that often you can replicate that at the individual level and be able to see the changes there. So it's almost as though you can practice that research model for yourself. So recognize a need, unfreeze or be willing to make changes, integrate a new change. And then the third is has been called refreeze, but I think is better termed kind of an openness or a continuing improvement stage where you're assessing and making smaller changes. It also depends on the nature of the change. So in this process of being let go and reframing experience, I think any kind of reading that you can do. Hey, Tammy, thank you for this resource here. Bruce Feiler, Life is in the Transitions. It's a great book. Excellent. I know that there are texts around executive transition. They're usually framed around choosing to transition to a new job or how one would behave in the first 90 days, for example. Those are good resources that are they're not necessarily geared toward those who have a job loss, but certainly would have applications that are closely related. Let's see. As co-host, can we go and take off the presentation? Stop sharing my screen and we can just
Yes,
there. Then it's more like I'm a person, not just a voice behind a PowerPoint.
absolutely. Any other questions? Please feel free to post or raise your hand. We'd be happy to unmute you.
And by all means, feel free to unmute if you feel like the question would be easier to speak rather than to type it out. To be in conversation. I was hoping not to make the presentation terribly long. It looks like left plenty of time for Q&A or dialogue, and it could really go on any tangent. This research was, I mean, one of the main takeaways is that there's no one answer. There's no one kind of type of job loss. The contributing factors are unique. The nature, the personality of the individual involved, they're all peculiar. So that has a heavy influence on what the experience is like. But I also noticed, and I'll add one of the concepts that I used in the study was around fixed versus growth mindset. I don't know how familiar that terminology is to you necessarily, but once belief and perceptions around their intelligence and their ability to learn. It's a belief system that influences everything else that you do. When you think about pivoting, for those who would have a more fixed mindset, they might be tempted to think, well, it's like, I don't know if I could do that. Been successful here because I've become a specialist and I've really honed my skills and focus in this one niche of higher education. When in reality, many folks can take those skills and translate them to other areas, even other fields where it doesn't even have to be just higher education adjacent in consulting or something. It could be in other fields. We need great folks to continue to contribute in higher education. So it certainly wouldn't be my hope that anyone would take this as an excuse to leave or something. But if there's purpose and passion around higher education, then there are so many opportunities, particularly for those with the heart and with the skills. What are your thoughts on personality tests and using them in workplaces? So I love personality tests, and that's my bias because I think they're so helpful and useful for giving common language. They're so useful and pragmatic in terms of sparking conversations that we may not be prone to have on our own. I know that as managers, we are maybe quick to use them because that can help streamline some of these conversations. With anything, there are also limits. There are limits in terms of the instrument's ability to accomplish the stated goal. There are limits in terms of folks' willingness to engage the process. I know I have a partner who hates personality tests, doesn't want to take them, but there are still benefits to be drawn there. And I think that there's great research when we talk about psychology and the big five personality traits. There's derailment research connected to that, and there's leadership research that are connected to those personality tests. And so I think that not only does taking that test help maybe illuminate and spark conversations that you need to have with yourself as well as your coworkers, but it also might give you the ability to see yourself in the research. When you look at big five research, so many fields use it. And so if you are able to get your type and understand maybe the way that you're organized, then you can be able to see, oh, I might be more or less prone to leadership, more or less prone to derailment, more or less prone to fill in the blank. So I do think that they are useful, and I would encourage anyone to engage them to the ability that they can. I know at times there's a cost attached. So if your institution can cover that cost, that's certainly desirable. And then to the degree that you can stand it. I mean, if you really can't stand personality tests, it's not the only way to understand who you are. There are other ways to do that. Other, I guess, assessments. There's certainly journaling, any kind of relationships you can build. Folks who are willing to give you direct and candid, constructive feedback. Ultimately, I think that's just kind of part of a whole of how is it that you can identify areas and opportunities for growth, and how can you also optimize your strengths. I think most folks have done who are really, really successful often find that just leaning into their strengths are the path forward. Certainly, you still need to be able to do other things and not just focus on that. But the positive psychology research, Strengths Finder is an assessment that comes to mind quickly, or Strengths Quest, to really build up your self identity and then self efficacy. And then I find that those areas of opportunity are easier to work on because you've got confidence about you and kind of this core of strengths that you can work on, and then you strengthen around those. So great question.
All right.
I get paid to talk, so I could just pontificate, but I think this study was interesting in part because it's a resilience study. How do leaders face adversity? And so while it might be interesting or certainly catch attention that this is about folks who got fired, who lost a job, it's also about how they adapt to change. It's also about how they face adversity and how some of them were really pleasantly surprised by what it drew out of them, and others were really dismayed and shocked that it uh, really took the knees out from under their confidence. They didn't realize, and Belma, we talked about this before we started the webinar, but the ways that our identity can often be intertwined with our professional, our career, maybe even our job title, we aren't quick to, I guess, reflect on that. And so that's another encouragement that I would give. And I think anybody who participated in the study would say at some level, take time to think about how your identity is entwined with your job title, your job functions, and just be careful, because let's be very clear, who we are is only in part the work that we do in our 9 to 5, or I know some of us work longer hours than that, but who we are and the value that we can bring is so much more than the job title. I think there are folks who are better in their jobs with lower job titles than folks with really high titles and salaries. So I would also draw on a past student affairs experience. I sat with a VP for student life, and he said, Jeff, I'm so pleased that you are working. At the time, I was a residence hall director. He said, I am happy to put you that proximate to students. Some of the folks on our board, I wouldn't trust as much. And so it's really about who we are, the light that we can be in the space that we're at. And as we kind of draw folks who have a similar resonance, similar spirit around us, as we can, again, grow that advisory board around us, the more wisdom then we begin to be able to allow it to flow through us and into the other folks. So regardless of whether you do or don't lose a job in your career, just continue to reflect on your identity and who you are, regardless of that job title.
All right. Jeff, this was wonderful. As I said before we started the webinar, I am excited. I'm so looking forward to hear more about your study, and I'm sure that our audience has also enjoyed and learned certain different how to approach it when it comes to being laid off or losing a job, and then how to move forward. And I hope that our attendees can reach out to you. I know you had
Absolutely.
your email and the social media links listed, so please feel free to reach out to Jeff if you have any questions. Before we go, I want to just thank you for your time, thank you for sharing your study with us, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful Wednesday. I had to think for a second. I was like, is today Wednesday? Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Belma. Thank you,
Have a
everyone,
good
for
one.
joining. And yes, happy to chat. Feel free to reach out. Love to talk to you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.